Hello, and thank you for watching this Know Your Rights presentation on Temporary Protected Status, or TPS, for Afghans. This presentation is intended to provide Afghan nationals with basic information about Temporary Protected Status, or TPS. During this presentation, we will provide answers to some frequently asked questions. We cannot provide you with legal advice or answer specific questions about you or your family's situation. This session is not intended as a replacement for a legal consultation with a reputable immigration attorney. This presentation will cover what is TPS and why should someone apply, what are the eligibility requirements for TPS, potential red flags or concerns that you should be aware of when applying for TPS, employment authorization, how to file for TPS, and frequently asked questions about TPS. To begin, we will discuss an overview of TPS. Temporary Protected Status, or TPS, is a short-term immigration benefit for non-citizens who cannot go back to their home country because it is not safe to return due to extraordinary temporary conditions, such as ongoing armed conflict, for example, a civil war, an environmental disaster, for example, a hurricane, earthquake, flood, or drought, or other extraordinary temporary circumstances, for example, an epidemic. TPS is a temporary legal status that allows eligible applicants to apply for work authorization and will protect people who receive the status from detention or removal, provided that the person with this status does not violate the terms of TPS. TPS is not a pathway to permanent residency or citizenship. TPS is typically granted for an 18-month period, and the expiration date is the same for everyone from a given country, regardless of when they apply. An applicant can only apply for TPS if the United States Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, has specifically designated their country for TPS. DHS announced that Afghanistan would be designated for TPS on March 15, 2022. At least 60 days prior to the expiration of the TPS designation, the Secretary of DHS determines whether to extend TPS, meaning that current TPS holders can renew their status, redesignate TPS, meaning that additional non-citizens can apply, or terminate TPS, meaning that the benefits expire. The current TPS designation for Afghanistan will expire on November 20th, 2023. An announcement should be made in September of 2023 as to whether TPS for Afghans will be extended, redesignated, or terminated. There are many benefits to TPS. Most importantly, someone who has TPS is not subject to immigration detention or removal, as long as the TPS holder maintains eligibility for TPS. In addition, someone who has TPS is eligible to apply for an employment authorization document, which is also called a work permit. In addition, someone with TPS is eligible to apply for travel authorization, called advance parole. Having TPS does not prevent someone from seeking or obtaining other forms of immigration relief. There are also limitations to TPS that it is very important to be aware of. TPS only provides legal status for a short duration, usually between 6 to 18 months. Currently, TPS for Afghanistan expires on November 20th, 2023. We should know whether TPS is redesignated or extended by September of 2023. TPS does not create a pathway to permanent residency, meaning that having TPS will not lead to a green card or citizenship. Additionally, TPS does not create follow to join opportunities, meaning that the TPS holder cannot bring their family from their home country to join them. It is also important to note that there is no derivative status available, meaning that each individual needs to apply for TPS with his or her own application. Children, no matter how young, need their own TPS application and cannot be part of their parents' applications. Similarly, for married couples, each spouse needs his or her own application. TPS is important to Afghans even if they already have parole status. TPS is beneficial for Afghans who have parole status so that they can continue to work and maintain their status in the United States even after parole expires. You must have a valid employment authorization document in order to work in the United States. TPS may be the best option for Afghans who have not yet received asylum, a special immigrant visa, or another path to a green card. Be aware of the date that your parole and EAD expire and start planning now to avoid a gap in status and employment authorization. You should apply for TPS at least 6 months before your parole ends and before TPS for Afghans expires on November 22nd of 2023. Now let's discuss TPS eligibility requirements. The TPS registration period for Afghans is from May 20th of 2022 to November 20th of 2023. The United States government basis for designating Afghanistan for TPS is based on the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, which has resulted in a humanitarian disaster. To be eligible for TPS, you must, 1, be an Afghan national or a stateless person with your last habitual residence in Afghanistan. 2, you must demonstrate continuous residence in the United States since March 15th, 2022. Continuous residence means that you have been living in the United States without interruption since that date. 3, you must demonstrate continuous physical presence in the United States since May 20th of 2022. Continuous physical presence means that you have actually been here in the United States during the time specified. Finally, 4th, you must apply for TPS within the initial designation period. For Afghans, that means you must apply by November 20th, 2023. Late filing is permitted only in very limited situations. Let's talk more about what each of these eligibility factors mean, starting with nationality. You must be a citizen of Afghanistan or have no nationality but last resided in Afghanistan. To prove that you are a citizen of Afghanistan, you can include a copy of your passport, birth certificate, other national ID document as part of your TPS application. If you are stateless, you can provide a sworn declaration, which is secondary evidence of your residence in Afghanistan. The next eligibility factor is physical presence. You must show that you have been continuously physically present in the United States since May 20th, 2022. This means that you are physically inside the United States during this time period. To show continuous physical presence, you can show proof of the date that you entered the United States. If you entered the US lawfully, this evidence includes the entry stamp in your passport or your I-94 entry record. If you entered the United States without permission, this evidence includes documents issued by immigration officials, such as detention records or a notice to appear, or any other documentation showing continuous residence, which is discussed more on the next slide. Now we'll discuss continuous residence. You must show that you have continuously resided in the United States since March 15, 2022. Continuously resided means that your home, for example, the apartment or the house where you slept in at night or where you received mail was in the United States during this time period. You must provide documents with your name and date that establish your U.S. location. For example, it could be helpful to include a receipt that shows you checked out books at a local library on a certain date, if it shows your name and the location on that receipt. But it's not helpful to provide a receipt from going to the grocery store on a certain date, since that receipt would not show your name. Examples of the most helpful documents to include to prove continuous residence are employment records, rent receipts, utility bills, or receipts from letters and companies, school records from the schools attended in the United States, hospital or medical records that show treatment or hospitalization in the United States, or attestations by church, union, or other organization officials who know you and know where you've been residing. There is an exception for the continuous physical presence and continuous residence requirements where an applicant's departure from the United States was brief, casual, and innocent. Be sure to consult with a trusted immigration attorney if you have departed the United States since the continuous physical presence and continuous residence dates to determine if you're eligible for this exception. Now we're going to talk about special considerations for Afghans applying for TPS. In certain circumstances, an applicant may be ineligible for TPS or may need to provide additional information about their situation to qualify for a waiver to obtain TPS. The next slides have a list of situations that may make an applicant ineligible for TPS or may require additional information to be included in the TPS application. Consult with a trusted immigration attorney if any of the situations on the next slides apply to you. Consult with an immigration attorney if you have ever been arrested, accused, or convicted of any crime, or you have otherwise had any interactions with law enforcement, either in the US or anywhere else in the world. If you have participated in harming or threatening another individual because of who they are, or you engaged in or encouraged terrorist activity. If you are a citizen of more than one country, or if after leaving your home country and before entering the United States, you resided in another country longer than simply transitioning through that country. Afghans with military or weapons training should consult with an attorney, including if they have ever been imprisoned or detained, were a member of a group that used weapons, or provided or transported weapons. In addition, Afghans who have had any contact with the Taliban should consult with an attorney. Contact includes paying a bribe to pass through a checkpoint, paying the Taliban a routine fee to obtain a passport or identity document, paying the Taliban for utilities, or providing tea or food to Taliban fighters, even if it was under force or threat. In US immigration law, there are terrorism-related inadmissibility grounds called TRIG, which mean that applicants who engaged in terrorism-related activity are not eligible for immigration benefits. There are certain TRIG exemptions for Afghans who supported the US military, were employed as certain civil servants in Afghanistan between September 27, 1996 to December 22nd of 2001, or after August 15 of 2021, or who provided only insignificant or limited material support to a designated terrorist organization. Individuals who fall into these TRIG exemption categories will likely still be eligible for TPS. Consult with a trusted immigration attorney for more information. If you are applying for multiple immigration benefits, It is important that the information in all of your applications is consistent. If an attorney is helping you with a different immigration benefit, let the attorney know that you are applying for TPS. Now we're going to talk about employment authorization. The application for an employment authorization document, or EAD, is on Form I-765. TPS applicants are eligible to apply for a TPS-based employment authorization document at the same time as they file for their application for TPS. There are benefits to getting an EAD even if the TPS holder does not intend to work. For example, the TPS holder can receive a Social Security number and use the EAD as a form of identification. To do so, request a Social Security card on the Form I-765 and answer the relevant questions. TPS holders can obtain a new EAD even if they already have an EAD based on another immigration status. If you are eligible for TPS, you can obtain a new EAD, regardless of whether you already have an EAD based on another immigration status. So consider whether it's worth the money to get a TPS EAD based on when your other EAD expires, if the other EAD is renewable, and how long the renewed EAD will be valid. If you already have an EAD, it's important that you have a plan for what you will do once that EAD expires so that you can remain eligible to work in the United States. Now we're going to talk about how you can apply for TPS. This slide has a checklist of what you will need to apply for TPS. We'll talk about each of these items in more detail on the next slides, and you can refer back to this slide when you want to view a complete list. Form I-821 is the TPS application, and it is required for all applicants seeking TPS. Form I-765 is the employment authorization document, and it is required only for TPS applicants who are also seeking a work permit. You can complete Forms I-821 and I-765 either on paper or online at MyUSCIS. If you're filing on paper, make sure to download the most recent version of the I-821 form directly from the USCIS website. USCIS does not charge money for these forms. You do not need to pay anyone to access these forms. Mail the forms to the correct USCIS location, which can be found on the USCIS website on the Temporary Protected Status Designated Country, Afghanistan page. If you're filing online, you will need to create an account at myuscis.gov. USCIS does not charge for creating an online account. You do not need to pay anyone to create an online account. As we discussed, when reviewing the physical presence and continuous residence requirements, you will need to submit supporting evidence along with your application for TPS. We recommend including one piece of evidence per month from the date the continuous residence or continuous physical presence requirements began until the date that you file. For example, in other words, submit one piece of evidence showing entry before March 15, 2022, and then one piece of evidence per month from March 2022 until the date that you file, showing that you have remained in the United States during that time. Any document that you submit should include your name, the date, and a U.S. location. Only submit copies of documents, not originals, as you might not get them back. You can review slides 13 through 16 for a list of suggested evidence. Any documents in a foreign language must be translated into English and accompanied by a certified translation. The certified translation does not need to be prepared by a professional translator. The translator must be an adult over the age of 18 who is not the TPS applicant. The translator is signing the certification, who's signing the certification only needs to be competent in English and the foreign language that the documents were translated from. Having a cover letter on the top of your application may make it easier for the government to confirm that your TPS application contains all of the required documents. The cover letter should list each of the documents enclosed with your TPS application. The cover letter should include your name and A number, if you have one, and should be addressed to the applicable USCIS location where you will mail your application. This address can be found on the USCIS website. This slide shows how much it costs to apply for TPS. The TPS application, which is Form I-821, costs $50. Applicants who are older than 14 years will also need to pay $85 for a biometrics fee. The EAD application costs $410 for applicants who are between 14 and 65 years old. The EAD application is free for applicants who are younger than 14 and older than 65 years old. So for an applicant who is between the ages of 14 and 65 years old, who is applying for both TPS and EAD, the total cost is $545. An applicant between the ages of 14 and 65 who is applying for TPS only would need to pay, the cost for that would be $135. For an applicant aged 66 and older, it costs $135 regardless of whether the applicant is seeking TPS and an EAD or TPS only, because the EAD application is free. For an applicant aged 14 and younger, it costs $50 regardless of whether the applicant is seeking TPS and an EAD or TPS only, because the EAD application is free and this age group does not need to pay for biometrics. An applicant may be eligible for a fee waiver if they can show that they received a means-tested benefit, such as Medicaid or SNAP, that their income is at or below 150% of the federal poverty guidelines, or that they are experiencing a significant financial hardship, like medical bills following an accident or homelessness. Processing times may be delayed when an applicant requests a fee waiver, and if the waiver is ultimately denied, the applicant must refile the TPS application. If you are interested in seeking a fee waiver, we recommend that you consult with a trusted immigration attorney before submitting your application for TPS. You will need to include two 2x2 passport-style photos of yourself if you're applying for a work permit. If you are not applying for a work permit, you do not need to include the passport-style photos. Before we conclude this presentation, we will discuss some frequently asked questions about TPS for Afghans. What are the next steps after you submit your TPS application? In about 6 weeks after filing for TPS, you will get a receipt notice showing that USCIS received your application. A notice for a biometrics appointment, which will be scheduled with the closest USCIS field office, will arrive typically a few weeks after the receipt notice. USCIS has not yet released the current processing time for initial TPS applications for people from Afghanistan. It can take several months for the TPS application to be processed. You can remain in the US legally while your application is pending. If USCIS needs more information to evaluate your TPS application, they will send you a request for evidence, also called an RFE. We recommend that you consult with a lawyer as soon as possible if you receive an RFE. What is the impact of TPS on other immigration statuses? A person may apply for and be granted TPS even if they hold another visa, such as a B2 tourist visa or a F1 student visa. However, to maintain the other status while also holding TPS, they must continue to be eligible for both statuses. It is important to note, even though receiving an EAD makes someone authorized to work, consider whether actually working would violate the terms of the other visa, which might have limitations on employment. For example, there are limitations on the numbers of hours and types of jobs that can be worked under an F1 student visa. What is the impact of TPS on my asylum case? You can apply for TPS and asylum at the same time, but there are some considerations to keep in mind. If you are seeking affirmative asylum before USCIS, then you must consider that if you are granted TPS and your affirmative asylum application is not granted, you will generally not be placed in removal proceedings. This means that you will not be able to renew your asylum application before an immigration judge unless or until your TPS status is terminated. You should consult with an immigration attorney to understand your options. If you are seeking defensive asylum in the immigration court, that means you are in removal proceedings. In this case, you can advise the immigration court of your TPS eligibility, and your case might be dismissed from immigration court. Consult with an immigration attorney to understand the implications. We'll address a few final questions before concluding this presentation. Am I eligible for TPS if I have a removal order? Yes. Winning TPS may prevent you from being detained or from being removed from the United States. It is best to consult with an immigration attorney if this situation applies to you. Can I travel outside of the United States with TPS? Approved TPS holders may apply for an I-131 for permission to travel in urgent or emergency circumstances. You should not travel without having a pre-approved travel permit, or else you risk losing your TPS status. Can I get a green card? Under current law, there is no pathway for a TPS holder to apply for a green card. You must be eligible for a green card another way, because under TPS, that does not create a pathway for eligibility. For more resources and to find an immigration attorney near you, scan this QR code with your phone. To do so, open your phone's camera and hold your phone up to the screen. Point the camera at the QR code. Make sure the QR code is centered on the phone screen. Wait for the code to scan, then click to open the web page, which will take you to information and web links for additional resources and how to find an immigration attorney near you. Thank you for joining us for this Know Your Rights presentation.